Good evening, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. The US will resume weapons deliveries to Ukraine after pausing them last week. President Donald Trump says Ukrainians must be able to defend themselves amid escalating Russian attacks. More on that in just a moment, but first, tonight's headlines. Controls on the Polish borders with Lithuania and Germany in full swing. Poland braces for extreme weather conditions and possible flooding. And FC Barcelona secures contract extension of Polish goalkeeper Voyek Stasny. The United States is to deliver weapons to Ukraine. After all, the move is surprising as only 6 days ago the Pentagon decided to halt crucial deliveries to the war-torn country. Does this signal a U-turn in Donald Trump's approach to Kyiv? Kazimierz Łysiak reports.
After halting some crucial arms deliveries to Ukraine last week, the US administration is once again changing its mind.
We're going to send some more weapons. We have to. They have to be able to defend themselves. They're getting hit very hard now.
Among the weapons included in last week's suspensions were the famous Patriot missiles, described by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as real lifesavers. But while they remain critical for air defense, the country actually has a more pressing need.
This all moved into drones, and the drones are evolving very quickly. And this, as you have seen, hundreds of Shaheds at night, sometimes 500. So it is impossible to intercept them with very costly Patriot missiles or even very costly air defense. So we need drones which intercept drones. So there's an arms race in innovation.
It's unclear what kind of arms will be delivered to Ukraine in the mostly defensive package promised by President Trump on Monday. But one thing is certain, any sort of pause in US aid for Ukraine results in scenes such as these and the loss of Ukrainian lives.
I would like to emphasize once again that this is real terrorism. On Monday morning at 6 a.m., when people were getting ready for work and some were still asleep, the Russians hit a residential building directly.
And yet all of that shouldn't be surprising, as Russia has been pounding its neighbor relentlessly for the past 3 years. So why the sudden back and forth in the Trump administration?
While some of Trump's supporters are believing that the US is still powerful enough to engage in all operational theaters it wants to engage, the other faction is saying that the US lacks this power and needs strict prioritization, and the sole peer competitor for US is the People's Republic of China.
The ever-changing decisions in the White House aren't the only problem for Ukraine. While the US and Europe are Kyiv's biggest supporters, Moscow is aided by its own powerful ally, China. According to the Ukrainian Foreign Minister, Beijing is getting more involved.
Following tonight's massive Russian air attack on Ukraine, we discovered in Kyiv a component of a Russian-Iranian Shahed combat drone, which was made in China and supplied just recently.
As peace in Ukraine remains only a faint memory, the country continues to be a battleground between two axes, the West and the East. For now, US aid will continue to flow. But for how long? For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Łysiak.
French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot said the EU may be hatching a plan with US lawmakers to develop what is touted to be tough sanctions on Russia over its ongoing invasion of Ukraine. But following the announcement, the European Commission was noticeably quiet on the issue. Instead, top EU officials in Brussels reiterated that the failed 18th sanctions package needs to be resuscitated. Our EU correspondent, Angela Skujins, has more from Brussels.
French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot told French television early Tuesday morning that Paris, on behalf of the EU, was working with US lawmakers to impose another round of sanctions against Russia for that country's ongoing and brutal invasion of Ukraine. He stated that the thrust of these sanctions would aim to drain the Kremlin of its economy, which would in turn support and bolster Ukraine on the battlefield.
Following French proposals, Europe is preparing to impose the toughest sanctions we've seen in 3 years, which will drain the resources that allow Vladimir Putin to continue his war.
Now, that French foreign minister went on to say that he was working with those US senators to form that sanctions package. TVP World put this claim to the European Commissioner for the Economy, Valdis Dombrovskis, who stated that the EU has historically worked with its transatlantic partners in Washington to pile pressure onto Vladimir Putin and would continue to do this into the future. But he stated the work for the European Union was moving forward with the failed 18th sanctions package against Russia.
We continue this engagement in those discussions with US. Well, right now, I would say the most imminent question for the EU is adoption of the 18th sanctions package. It has been proposed by the European Commission already a while ago. We also touched upon this question in today's ECOFIN, and we urge member states to finalize the discussions and to reach urgently a political agreement on this 18th sanctions package.
Now, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, as well as the foreign policy boss, Kaja Kallas, outlined the contours of the 18th sanctions package last month in the Belgian capital. The aim there was to hit the Kremlin where it hurts in terms of draining revenues from that country's financial, military, as well as energy sectors. But we know that in the run-up to that major decision being finalised, Slovakia and Hungary vehemently opposed this 18th sanctions package, stating their outrage with the European Commission's proposal to totally phase out Russian energy by 2030. So that European Commission, that Commissioner stating in that comment that he was urging those member states to move forward. Many in the Belgian capital understand this to be Slovakia and Hungary. Only time will tell whether they are receptive to his lobbying efforts. Angela Skujins from Brussels for TVP World.
Controls on Poland's borders with Germany and Lithuania are now in full swing. Polish Deputy Interior Minister Wiesław Szczepański said that nearly 6,900 people have been subject to checks on Monday. The tightened border controls are scheduled to last for 30 days until August 5th. Franciszek Pilis reports.
Following the Polish Parliament's decision announced by Prime Minister Donald Tusk last week, border controls on Poland's eastern and western neighbors have finally arrived.
We have made a decision, and I wanted to inform the public and the ministers that we are restoring temporary controls on the Polish-German and Polish-Lithuanian borders. The decision was made today and will enter into force for organizational reasons on Monday, July the 7th.
By the second day since the reintroduction of these border checks, nearly 6,900 people and over 3,100 vehicles have been checked by the Polish border guard. According to reports, an Estonian national was apprehended at the Polish-Lithuanian border for transporting 4 Afghani nationals without proper documentation. The would-be migrants were then promptly returned to Lithuania for further processing. Some have argued that reinstating border checks could lead to a traffic standstill. However, travelers on both Poland's eastern and western borders don't seem to mind, some even encouraging the initiative.
I've been behind the wheel for 25 years. I no longer feel stressed. No tension. For me, it's just another check. And I will say, as a driver, it is even better for me that they check here at the beginning of the border, and then when you get further down the country, I am calm.
I kind of think that it's right. I used to work at customs. I've experienced a lot, let's put it that way.
Others, however, see the border checks as a step in the wrong direction and a forfeiting of Poland's EU values.
We fought for a long time to join the European Union and also to sign the Schengen Agreement, and it looks as if the Schengen zone is coming to an end.
Warsaw hopes the border checks will not only counteract illegal migration, but also show other Schengen countries that the migration trail from Lithuania through Poland to Germany is nearly impossible to cross for illegal migrants, and encourage Germany to open its borders once again. For TVP World, Franciszek Pilis.
After days of scorching heat, Poland now braces for possible flash floods. Extreme weather conditions have prompted authorities to issue multiple warnings as heavy rain, hurricane winds and falling trees have already injured at least 4 people. Natalia Oriol reports on what awaits Poland in the next few days.
In September last year, Poland was heavily hit by the most intense floods Europe has seen since 2013, while the Vistula River in Warsaw fell to a historic low in the same month. It seems extreme weather has become a hallmark of Polish summers in recent years, and this one is no different. Last week, a scorching heat wave resulted in temperatures as high as 37 degrees in the western parts of the country, but the country is now set to grapple with water. This week, the Polish Institute of Meteorology and Water Management issued heavy rain and flood warnings. The city of Sanok in the Subcarpathian region is already fighting heavy rainfall, which has led to minor flooding. So, how well prepared is Poland?
As we saw last year, we are not prepared for such situations. The artificial reservoirs that we have right now, they are not enough. And the main problem is that we destroyed the nature, and the nature lost its ability to absorb huge amounts of water.
Third-degree heavy rain warnings are in place for central and southern Poland, indicating a risk of rivers overflowing. Flood warnings are in place mostly for southern Poland. The regions most at risk include Mazovia, Lublin, Lesser Poland and the Subcarpathian region, with 20 to 30 millimeters of rain expected within a few hours. The Government Center for Security issued warnings of torrential rain and possible floodings on the night of July 8 and 9 for counties in the Lower Silesian region. It was one of the regions worst affected by last year's flood. Is history bound to repeat itself, or can we prevent future losses?
So what we have to do, we have to focus on restoration, on nature restoration, because the more wilderness we have and the more biodiversity we have, then the nature is more resilient for such circumstances. And if nature is more resilient, then we are also more resilient for torrential rains and droughts.
Residents in southern Poland closely observe water levels, as looking at the forecast, clear skies are not on the horizon just yet. This report for TVP World by Natalia Oriol.
Tuesday witnessed the conclusion of the European finance ministers' meeting in Brussels. For Romania, it meant a formal go-ahead for sorting out its public finances by 2030, as the country has been grappling with a record-level deficit. Our own Jan Kennedy has more.
The Council of the European Union made a decisive statement on Tuesday. Romania must put its finances in order by 2030.
This is an important and positive step towards complying with a new excessive deficit procedure recommendation, provided that all measures are fully and swiftly legislated and implemented. We will monitor progress closely and come forward with our assessment in autumn.
Romania has found itself in trouble after its public deficit ballooned to 9% of GDP last year, the highest level in the European Union and 3 times the level considered safe. This has forced the government to embark on a mission to cut public spending. Officials expect the biggest inflows to come from the VAT hike, more than 1.2 billion euros in 2025 and 4 billion in 2026. Delaying public sector wage increases will save 3.55 billion, while higher excise duties are set to add 1.3 billion through 2026. The proposed cuts were met with backlash from the public, with Romanian health and education workers taking to the streets in protest.
Here in the health department, they cut the bonuses down to 60 euros, but with the VAT increase, everything will be more expensive. The purchasing power will decrease, and it will take us back 10 years.
Prime Minister Ilie Bolojan defended the measures, saying they were essential to maintain investor confidence. He warned of severe consequences if Romania were downgraded from the current BBB- to junk status.
This would mean that our country is no longer recommended for investments, and very few foreign investments would come to such a country. We would enter a brutal recession, which would mean job losses, high unemployment, a currency that would depreciate massively, and practically we cannot afford this at the moment.
But economists say that Bologjan's claims about the country going bankrupt are somewhat exaggerated.
I do not expect the Romanian government to go bankrupt even if they continue with relatively high deficits. But the weakening of the currency because of high current account deficits and cutting the rating and so on, all of those were and are still credible possible risks for Romania.
To make matters worse, the central bank decided to keep interest rates in the country at the highest level in Europe, out of fear of the inflationary pressure the tax hikes could have. The government wants to pass them as soon as possible, and has opted for a procedure which opens it up to a no-confidence vote in Parliament, which it will likely survive. For TVP World, Jan Kennedy.
Retirement? Not yet. FC Barcelona confirmed it was able to secure a 2-year contract extension with Polish goalkeeper Voyek Stasny. Aaron Damon reports on the move, which could lead to a domino effect at the Catalan giant.
Less than a year ago, Polish goalkeeper Voyek Stasny returned from the football wilderness, reversing his retirement to join Spanish super club FC Barcelona.
It's an incredible story, really, because Szczepański was kind of on the beach when Barcelona came calling last October, and they kind of lured him out of retirement, and obviously the temptation of playing for such a huge club, and of course playing alongside his Polish colleague Robert Lewandowski, was too tempting to turn down.
Despite a shaky start to the season, the ex-Arsenal and Juventus shot-stopper quickly regained form, keeping 14 clean sheets in just 30 appearances, on the way to the Spanish League title. And Stasny's success is now paying off, this week putting pen to paper on a new deal with the Catalan club until 2027. But his ascent back into the spotlight has left another star, club captain and German international Marc-Andre ter Stegen, on the sidelines. Stasny first came into the frame after ter Stegen suffered a season-ending injury in October. But now, with Stasny staying in Barcelona and the 24-year-old keeper Joan Garcia joining from crosstown rivals Espanyol, ter Stegen faces an uncertain future.
Barcelona have 3 keepers. Now, ter Stegen's the highest earner of all of those, and Barcelona are rather trying to do some financial juggling, so you might expect ter Stegen to depart. I mean, one of them is going to have to leave. I would say it does appear that Szczepański might be muscling ter Stegen out.
With some German media also speculating that ter Stegen's role at the club is under threat, FC Barcelona's exit doors could be swinging before the new season kicks off next month. Aaron Darman, TVP World.
And we're returning to our main topic of the day, the US resuming military shipments to Ukraine. And to analyse the development, we are joined by Mark Toth, US National Security and Foreign Policy Analyst. Good evening.
Good evening, Machi. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. So we know how much emphasis Donald Trump puts on personal relations with various world leaders. Now, do you believe he's really fed up with Vladimir Putin this time?
I think he is. Look, since he took office, Trump has been consistent about one thing. He wants to end the bloodshed in Ukraine. Now, there are multiple ways to get there, and while we can disagree with the approach he's taken to date in terms of not defending Ukraine enough and giving them offensive weapons, I think the one thing that's been clear is that he doesn't want to see Ukrainian civilians dying. And Putin has pushed him once too many, too far. in this case. Seeing civilians targeted is something that Trump has said on the record he's against, and officials around him in Washington, D.C. have been citing that as a reason why he's decided to resume these defensive weapon shipments. So I do believe that it's meaningful and that Trump wants to see this through, and that he may be starting to see the light now that Putin is never going to give up, and that it's really a question of what does the U.S. do to put an end to this war. And you've got to, in my opinion, enable Ukraine to win it.
Well, Donald Trump says Ukraine will receive more weapons, but again, he underlines the word defensive weapons. So why primarily defensive weapons for Ukraine?
Yeah, Maciej, I think that's an important distinction to make, because certainly in this package that was held up, as was reported by NBC News, most of those were offensive weapons. But when you kind of dig deep into those weapons, for instance, 92 of them were AIM Sparrow missiles, which the U.S. Air Force doesn't use that much. And so to argue that they're low or something didn't make sense. So what that was telling me, and the withholding of artillery shells, 252 GMLRSs, which are missile systems missiles that are used with the HIMARS system or the M270 launcher. That was telling me that there's more internal debate inside the White House, probably led by a man by the name of Elbridge Colby, in terms of what they want to allocate for Ukraine and what they want to keep in reserve for a potential fight over Taiwan in the Indo-Pacific with China. So the fact, though, that these are defensive in nature, I think goes to the core of what, at least for now, is Trump's messaging, is that he wants Putin to stop targeting civilians. And so that's what you're seeing here. But again, the number of systems, the 10 that he's promising, Patriot systems, is a far cry from the 30 that it was. And it looks like he's trying to make sure that Europe backfills those with their own supplies of Patriot missile systems. So time will tell. But you're key to note that these aren't defensive or offensive weapons going to Ukraine, but they are indeed defensive in nature, which is helpful. But that's not going to stop the drones being launched or the ballistic missiles getting launched. Ukraine needs offensive weapons to do that.
But don't you think that Donald Trump, well, against all odds, is still trying to reach a diplomatic agreement with Russia after his last phone call with Vladimir Putin? I'm referring to these defensive weapons, because if he would say, like, we're sending, long-range missiles that can hit some objects inside Russia, then that would change this narrative. But he specifically says just defensive weapons to protect civilians.
Right. Maciej, it's a fair question. I think what's happening, though, is that events are starting to outpace Trump's position on this. And by that, I mean China. Look, the foreign minister was just yet saying, look, we can't afford a loss. Same that Takaja, the chief diplomatic representative of the EU last week in Brussels. They're indicating that. Just this last several days on the July 4th attacks on Kyiv, 5 different Chinese companies, their stamps were found on weapons that were used on the Russian-produced Shahed drones, those Iranian drones, which were quickly sanctioned today by Zelensky of saying. So it's increasingly clear that China wants to see this war continue. They're being somewhat two-faced in terms of saying that they're a neutral and that they want a peaceful ends. It's starting to look more like they want endless war as a way of maybe tying the U.S. down and giving them time to build up the forces if they have to militarily retake Taiwan. So, from that standpoint, I think Trump's going to be faced with a very new reality soon. And I think they are waking up to that. I think the Trump administration in general, Capitol Hill here in Washington, D.C., is also waking up to that fact, and that there's going to be a new reality soon. So what Trump wanted may not be doable anymore, and he's going to have to look at how to win this a different way.
I see. But that can be, a thing of a distant future. Now, what weapons does Ukraine need now, at the moment, given the constant aerial attacks on its civilian infrastructure and the frontline situation? Only a while ago, we've heard that Patriot missiles are not very effective against these, swarms of drones that are attacking Ukrainian cities because, well, they're simply too costly, right, to launch them every time a drone appears on Ukraine, in the Ukrainian skies. So how to protect the cities against Russian attacks?
Right. No, and you're right to focus on that. Interdiction is the key, and that takes being able to fight a deep fight, is how we describe it. And that takes weapon systems like ATACMS, ideally the Taurus, for instance, that Germany has yet to equip Ukraine with, that can go deeper and take out the Archer. I know Ben Hodges, who's been on TV World quite a bit, General Hodges has stated repeatedly it's important to take out the Archer and not just focus on taking out the Arrow each time. Because if you're using F-16 missiles, et cetera, to take out $30,000 drones, that makes no sense economically or militarily speaking. So you really need to be interdicting from where they're being launched and where they're being built. And Ukraine simply needs a longer range suite of weapons to do that. In terms of interdicting them when they're close to the front lines, to kind of get to the other part of your question there, Ukraine still needs the full suite of weaponry to be able to fight a combined arms warfare. They can't do that yet. Neither side in this war has really been able to maneuver since Ukraine did it masterfully in their opening months of the war, where they took back many of the Russian gains. But since then, this has kind of become a war of attrition, fought along a 900-kilometer battlefront that doesn't move very much, moves a kilometer at a time, because no one can maneuver. And so in terms of what Ukraine needs now, it needs two things. It needs to be able to keep fighting this deep fight, deeper with ATACMS and the like, but it also needs to be able to maneuver in battle, and that's just going to take more air power, more tanks that can withstand drone attacks, et cetera. They really have to think that, because at this point in time, it's just too static of a war. Each side is stuck in a war of attrition, essentially.
Well, maybe the front line isn't moving that much, but on the other hand, Ukraine has resumed its operations in the Kursk and Belgorod regions of Russia. That's the latest. So, what's the purpose of this operation? Because I remember them, basically fleeing from there, right? They had really huge losses in the Kursk region.
Yeah, I would describe the Kursk operation more in terms of how it ended as a tactical withdrawal. At some point when you take land, it's not always to hold it, right? It's to force the enemy to respond, to create a reaction, and for them to divert troops. So the fact that they're going back there is indicative that they're concerned about buildups elsewhere. We recently had the 50,000 buildup of Russian troops in and around Kyiv. So it could be a bit of that in terms of diverting those forces, diverting them elsewhere. And also it could be a means, Ukraine has done this masterfully in the past, of when they feel that fighting in the Donbass is going against them, forcing the Russians to divert forces from there back into Mother Russia, if you will, so that they can alleviate the current, slight marginal gains, if you will, that Russia's making in the Donbass, in and around the Pokrovsk region.
Now, lastly, I'd like to ask you about recent reports concerning Ukrainian spies and saboteurs working for the Kremlin. Only today there were two such instances. Well, one was the high-ranked military officer who was caught red-handed reporting on the Ukrainian army movement. And the other case, there was a lady arrested in the west of Ukraine who apparently planted a bomb in a hotel. Now, I'm wondering about the scale of this phenomenon. Do many Ukrainians serve the invader?
Yeah, I can't quantify how many, but whenever you have a country that has as many ethnic Russians as it does, ethnic Ukrainians, you're always going to have this. I mean, many have family members that live across the borders. They've got family members in Russia. There's lots of pressure there. So the risk is always there, and it's going to be an ongoing battle to do it. I'd like to believe that it's fewer in number than what we see on television, because obviously anytime something like this happens, it's notable, and then you get concerned, could they target Zelensky? Could they take out key leadership in terms of military and the like? But Ukraine to date has done a fairly good job of ferreting out these types of spies and staying on top of it. But I think that's a risk, unfortunately, Machi, that's just going to be there until the end of the war. There's just simply too many people that Russia probably can and keeps trying to recruit from that has ties to Russia.
And they know how to recruit people. Mark Toth, the U.S. National Security and Foreign Policy Analyst, was our guest this evening. Thank you very much.
Pleasure, Machi. Good evening.
And thank you for watching, and stay with us for much more news and features here on DVP World.